Hello, this is Carrie Shekaloff, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction to running records. And then this will be followed by a actual walkthrough of how to take the running record conventions. For this work, you are going to want to have your text leveling and running record empty outline. I would have that printed off and just have that in front of you. And then as we go through the screencast, you can pause things and fill in the blanks there. These will not be notes that you turn into me as your weekly prep. These are just notes that you'll need to answer the questions on your weekly prep. They're also notes that you would use to then study across the term. Okay, let's get started thinking about how are we going to record reading behavior. So just to give you a general outline, this is an example of a running record. It's just a way of taking some notation, keeping track of what students are doing when they're reading out loud. And when kids are reading out loud, we can analyze what they've done in our record of what they've read and said, and then we can analyze that to determine, well, what is this child paying attention to and what do we need them to pay attention to next? We can also do a running record to figure out how much of the text the child could read accurately. That's called the percentage accuracy. So in this text, the child could read 92% of the text. We are going to be able to tell how many words kids can fix up. You know, every reader makes errors, but can they fix them up? That's your self-correction rate. And that's always described in a ratio right there at the bottom. So a running record is a skill that a lot of teachers use. It's going to be the way that you see what people are thinking when they're reading, especially little kiddos. So on your form, the first thing we're going to think about is what are generally people doing when they read. And we're going to review some cueing systems and strategies that you may have heard about in maybe phonics or other literacy classes. But we're just going to kind of clarify what it is that we're taking notes on. All right, when you read, you're consulting cueing systems. Right now, when you looked at that slide, as you're reading, you're thinking about different sources of information. And we call those sources of information or resources the cueing systems. There are 4 of those. The first one is the graphophonemic cueing system. Now, if we look at this word, grapho sounds like graph, or graphic, like graphic novel. It means visual. So the graphemes in English are the letters. Phonemes are the sounds, right? So the graphophonemic cueing system is just the relationship between letters and sounds. You learned a lot about the graphophonemic cueing system in phonics. You learned, for example, that when you put the P and the H together in English, it makes one sound, and that sound is, that's right. So graphophonemic cues are just the letters and how they relate to sounds. We're also using semantic cues. Semantic cues are the meaning on the page, so the context. So when you read a sentence, you're thinking about the context on the page, the sentence, maybe even a picture on the page, and those pieces of information help you determine the meaning of the text. So semantic is the meaning or context clues on the page. Syntactic cues are the grammar or the structure. When the child's reading along, are they thinking about what could possibly come next, given the grammar of the sentence? So if the child's reading along and they read the cat, you know, the next word is not going to be sandwich. The cat sandwich? That doesn't sound like English. We don't say words in that kind of order. The next word in the cat would have to be some kind of action. The cat sat, the cat thought, the cat ran, whatever it is, right? Now, we didn't go through and diagram that sentence orally while it was being read. Generally, we just have a sense of what's possible. The cat sat, right? So as you're reading, you're thinking about the grammar and structure of the sentences and considering what could possibly make sense to come next. And the last thing we use is our life experience, our schema, or we call those pragmatic cues. When you're using what you know about the world to kind of make sense of a text. So we use all four of these cueing systems when we read. And when kids are reading, we're going to take running records to see which ones are they paying attention to. Sometimes kids are thinking a lot about the pictures and the meaning of the sentences on the page, but they're not paying very close attention to the graphophonemic cues. Other times, kids are really listening to the graphophonemic cues. They're looking at every letter, but they could read more effectively if they thought a little bit more about what would sound right or what would make sense in English. So we're going to want kids to use all of those resources. As a little aside, on your weekly, on your empty outline, it asks you to think about, well, what's the difference between pragmatic cues, because those are meaningful, and semantic cues? There is a difference. Let's see if you can figure that out. Let's go on, though, to thinking about strategies. So we use strategies. Those are in-the-head processes that we use to make sense of text. So a strategy is something you're going to do with the cueing systems. So the first four strategies on this slide are early strategies. These are what real young kids have to learn to make sense of text. One strategy is one-to-one match. That means for every one thing I see here, I need to say one thing. I get my backpack. That's one-to-one match. Kids have to learn that. Kids also have to learn to check the pictures. In early books, pictures help us think about what's possible in the story. They have to use known words. So when kids are learning to read, they learn a few words that they just know by heart. And those words will become sort of islands of certainty for them. So if you know the word my, when you come to this page in the book, that word should just pop into your head. We also want kids to check the first letter and check further letters in the word as they learn more of those phonics features. At first, when kids know very few letters, we'll be happy if they're just looking at the first letter. We want them to do some predicting. We want them to be thinking about the story and consider what would make sense to come next. So in this sentence, I get my, it's probably going to be something that you would take to school, not I get my elephant, right? So that helps us kind of narrow down the kinds of things we might anticipate seeing at the end of the sentence. Predicting is just thinking ahead. Another strategy that we use is confirming. After you've said something, I get my book, you might want to confirm that. And you can confirm it by using the semantic cues, checking the picture. That doesn't look like a book. Or you could confirm it using the graphophonemic cues. Book would seem like it would be a lot shorter, b-ook, than that word. That word's really long. So confirming just means looking for new information. Monitoring is when you're making sense, or you're making sure the story makes sense. So if you were to read, I get my back on this text. That doesn't sound right. I get my back. I don't think that makes sense with the story. It's about the things you need for school. So monitoring is about thinking about what you've read, making sure it makes sense and it looks right. And then this last piece, cross-checking, it's when you use more than one cueing system at the same time. So the child could be reading this book along and they could say, I get my back. And they'll say, oh, you know what? That doesn't sound right. Let me check that picture. Oh, that looks like a backpack. So at first they were making a prediction based on the letters that they saw, back. But back doesn't make sense here, so then they checked the picture. So cross-checking is when you're checking more than one source of information, and it's what really good readers do. We use more than one source of information to solve a word. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to see kids doing, and we want running records to help us see all of those things. So let's talk a little bit about what the running record will help us see. Well, the running record will help us see what kind of book it is for the child. So if we give this child a book and they can read it at 95% accuracy, they can read almost all of the words correctly, we'd call that book an independent level text. So you may be a good reader and your independent level text is level F in kindergarten. So you can read 95% of the words on the level F text all by yourself. I may be not as good a reader. I may have only be able to read 95% of the words on a level A text. But we both have some kind of text that we know will be easy for us. Texts are only easy for kids when they can read about 95% of those words accurately, and that's really much higher than teachers usually suspect. An instructional level text is a text that has some tricky parts for us, but it's not so hard that it's overwhelming us. Instructional level texts are the texts we're going to use for guided reading, and that's any level text that you can read at 90 to 95% accuracy. So if you can read 92% of a level E text, then that's an instructional level text for you. It's a good one for guided reading. Now, we don't want to give kids books that are frustrational. Frustrational level texts are any text that they can read less than 90% accurately. So if you can read less than 90% of the book accurately, you're going to be very frustrated. It will be too hard to really learn from. Now, that number is always surprising to teachers. I think a lot of teachers think like, well, I don't know, 75% of the text would be about okay. No. When kids are reading less than 90% of the text, it's so hard that it's no longer useful practice for them. So it's really important, these levels are pretty close to each other, that we find texts that kids have a little bit of challenge, but not too much challenge in. That's the instructional level text. Again, we'll be able to figure out if kids can fix up the errors when they make them. This is in a rate, so it's self-correction rate. 1 to 2 means they can fix up 1 out of every 2 errors they make. That's really good. We'd like to see that. But that could be 1 to 3, it could be 1 to 5, it could be 1 to 20. That's not good, right? We're also going to be able to see the strategies kids are using. Are they monitoring? Are they confirming? Are they cross-checking? And we'll see which cueing systems they're paying attention to. Are they looking at those graphophonemic cues to confirm their predictions? So we'll be able to say things about what kids are doing with text. We'll be able to say, when they come to a tricky part, they tend to predict by using the picture, but they need to look at those graphophonemic cues, the letters and sounds, to really confirm their prediction. Or we'll be able to say, they really are good at taking a word apart and decoding it. They're very good at looking at the graphophonemic cues, but they really need to just think more about the story and what makes sense. That'll help speed up their processing. Running records, in addition to showing us what kids are doing while they're actually reading, we can track over time their progress. So this student, Reginald, they started out in, this is in March, reading a level A text. And here's the actual level A text. They read it at 94%, and they had a 1 to 2 correction rate. But in a few months, they were at a level B. And you can see that they were at a level B for a little while, then they went up to C. So we can see the levels changing, and we can also see the percentage accuracy and the self-correction rate on this chart. And this little chart just shows how much growth this kiddo made between kindergarten and second grade. So it's over a couple of years here. By second grade, this kid was reading a level N text, which is fantastic. Seeing that the Ohio Reading Achievement Tests for third grade guarantee are at about a level M. This kid is doing great in second grade. So teachers can use running records. There's a couple of products they could use. This is a system called a qualitative reading inventory. So there's different kinds of qualitative reading inventories. There's the developmental reading assessment, the DRA. There's a benchmark assessment by Pinnell and Fountas you'll hear teachers talk about. What a qualitative reading inventory is just a kind of a packet of books that are in gradations of difficulty. So you'd have in that little box, you'd have a level A text, a level B text, a level C text. And these little texts are nice because then you can quickly find the level that you want to give the child. The child reads the little book, and while they're reading the book, you're going to take some notes on top of what they are reading. So this picture is what is in front of the teacher. The teacher is looking at this and taking notes on this sheet while the child's reading the book. Or sometimes they look like this. So this is reading A to Z, same thing. The child be reading a little book and you'd be taking the notes on top of the text. I'm going to teach you how to do it the hardest way, but it's also the most flexible way. Right here, you see a teacher. She's just got a blank piece of paper over there, and she's got a student sitting in front of her, and she's just taking a running record while he reads. We're going to learn to take a running record on a perfectly blank piece of paper, because that means that any time of the day, so you're watching, you saw Kate Roth's video in class, and Kate Roth at the beginning of the day just walks up to kids and asks them, start reading for me a little bit, and she can take notes and see how the child is doing on that text. So, intro to running record conventions is our next step. So the next step is figuring out how is it that we learn to take these little check marks on a blank sheet of paper to figure out what kids are doing. And that is your next screencast. This screencast just kind of gets you organized to learn how to take these conventions. So I would suggest before you sit down to do this next and last screencast that you stretch, get your mind fresh. This next one's going to be the challenge. So get ready.